Okay, I'm going to call this Finance Committee meeting to order. Members present are Mr. Frazier, Mr. Koss, Mr. Bove, Mr. Rathber, Mr. Marmee, and myself. The first issue is Resolution 17-66, appropriating and disappropriating monies for the current expenses of the municipal corporation. This is $500 from General Services. We have an appropriation and a disappropriation. Who's going to speak on that? Okay. I don't know.
He's got it.
Okay, thank you.
You guys are 1 minute early.
Oh, sorry.
We're just transferring $500 into an overtime account from a service general account for overtime in the Parks Department. It's been a busy year in the Parks Department. We've cut a lot of grass, and the grass really hadn't slowed up. And we've ran through our temporary help service money, and so that's where we're at on this.
Okay, so we're going to do a disappropriation and then we'll
Appropriation.
do an appropriation.
Yes.
I'll make a motion.
Okay, motion by Bove. Second by Frazier. Any questions or comments?
I have one. Is this going to solve it for the rest of the year, or are we still facing overtime challenges in that department, or what?
You know, with all the temporary help being gone, what really drives the overtime in the parks and cemetery is a couple things. Grass, yes, but another thing is burials in the cemetery. Like we had 3 burials this weekend. That's time and a half, and you just can't, you can't dictate when people are buried.
Yeah.
And those eat up a lot of overtime dollars.
Okay.
So it depends, I guess, is my answer.
And so does this get us back to?
It gets us where we need at this moment, yes.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries 5-0.
Thank you.
And now we need to do the appropriation.
Yes.
Motion by
Second.
Bove, second by Frazier. Again, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Thank you.
Motion carries 5-0. Okay. And now we're to resolution number 17-67, appropriating monies for the current expenses of the municipal corporation. This is the HODAG fund in the amount of $307,550. Mr. Mauder.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I sent out an email for some history because I thought some of you might not be familiar with this. Carol, I know you're very familiar because this was in your backyard for many years. As far as what we call the Pink House, that was part of the HODAG. But the main thing is there's several projects that these grant funds that originated back in '88 and '89 were put towards. And the mortgage payments that have come in over the last 10 years or so has generated the $307,550 that you're seeing here on the appropriation. And there's been some discussions with several developers that might have some potential projects that we could put this to good use for. So I think it's time we free up the money and make that available.
Okay. Any questions or comments? Okay. I'll have a motion. Motion by Koss.
Second.
Second by Bove. Any other questions or comments? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries 5-0.
Thank you.
We do have a late item. We can't vote on it tonight. It's something that can go to council under Rule 11 next Monday night. This is a resolution 17-73, appropriating monies for the current expenses of the municipal corporation. Mr. Rhodes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. What this is additional dollars for salt. When you wind down a curvy road, occasionally you end up with some things that jump up on you, and this was one of these. That there's some additional salt out there that Newark is committed to buy, and from last year's salt budget, and we're going to honor that commitment and pay for it. This is out of the unappropriated balance of the street and traffic department. And it's kind of, do you appropriate that money now and buy that salt now? Or do you pay an $11,000 storage fee on the salt and pay for it out of next year's budget, which would be the same money? So what we decided to do is not pay the storage fee and take the salt in. So that's why we're appropriating this money out of the unappropriated balance of the street and traffic account. And hence, we've got enough salt to do the whole year this year. And our contract that we sign next year, the amount of tons that we'll enter into will be lower. And our budget will reflect a lower amount in the salt budget in the year 2018. And we'll save about $11,000 in storage fees.
Okay. Anybody have any questions? Again, we can't vote on it tonight.
How time sensitive is this? Do we have to?
Please expedite it.
Okay. Motion. Oh, that's right. I'm sorry.
No, we can't do that.
We want to vote on it, Dave.
And with this, Finance Committee is done, and we're going to do Street Department. That should take about 2 minutes. So I need all ward council members who are on the Street Committee. And Mr. Bub, are you here for Mr. Marmee?
Sure.
Okay.
I'm just going to sit there.
That's fine, because I'm going to do that on personnel. Is that okay? Ryan?
Please.
Yeah, okay. Well, because I'm on service, I just don't want to play musical chairs. Hi there.
You guys colored for me? It's nice to show up.
Looks like it, doesn't it?
All three of us?
Yeah.
There you go. I didn't get the memo. Text message. Why hit you up on Twitter? Apparently Frazier didn't get it. Snapchat. Oh. Smoke signals. Jeremy didn't get it either.
Oh, sorry. Okay, so street committee members are present. Ms. Hall, Mr. Blake, Mr. Rath, Mr. Mangus, Mr. Lang, Mr. Bub for Mr. Marmee, and myself. This is for ordinance 17-41, vacating a portion of Bird Avenue running west from Union Street. Said street right-of-way is located between 278 and 282 Union Street. I know Brian was there. Where'd he go?
He's here.
We're speeding.
Street committee?
Yep.
So we got a petition from property owners adjacent to a section of Bird Avenue running west off of Union Street. It's a little stub of the street in there, requesting that it be vacated. And both adjacent property owners to the street have signed the petition, and that allows us to forego the publishing that needs to be done and the resolution of intent. So before you have an ordinance to vacate the street, that stub of the street. We sent the request out to the police, fire, all the other city departments for comments on it. No one had any problems with that. So I guess if there's any questions, I'll be glad to try to answer them otherwise.
Motion.
Okay. Motion by Mr. Blake.
I think the gentleman requesting the vacations here, if you have any questions.
Would you like to make a comment, sir?
Not really.
Okay.
I'm just gonna make it more convenient for parking.
Okay. So I have a motion?
Second.
Okay, second by Ralph. Any discussion? Any comments, questions? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries 7-0. Moves on to full council. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We are now to Personnel Committee.
Okay, it's 5:39. We'll call this Personnel Committee meeting to order. Those present are myself, Ryan Bubb, John Lang, Jeff Rath, for Doug Marmee, Dee Hall, and Mike Mangus. The substance of tonight's discussion is Ordinance 17-42, which is creating 2 positions of court security bailiff within the municipal court and setting compensation therefore. The Honorable Judge Higgins is at the podium. Go ahead.
Thank you for allowing me to come down. Just finished up a jury trial, so it was very convenient. The municipal court is going to be hiring 2 what we call security bailiffs to provide security primarily for the Licking County Municipal Court on the floors we occupy, but also tangentially to the rest of the city. And I think it would probably be better left to the administration to explain the details of what we're going to be doing. But essentially, these 2 gentlemen will be manning an X-ray machine and scanning devices for the entranceway to City Hall. Similar to how every other court in the state of Ohio operates its court. We believe this is long overdue, and I appreciate the cooperation of Mayor, Service Director, Safety Director, in finally getting us to this point. You'll notice that the court has some funds available, and at least presently and for at least a while, we should have enough funds in our special project account to pay the salaries of these individuals, so it won't be taxing on general fund budget. I don't really know when we'll be ready to go on this. It's really going to be up to the administration to buy some capital goods so that the front door is operable, and other avenues of ingress and egress are limited. So that's it. Any questions? I'd be happy to answer them if I can.
Okay, we'll start with questions from the committee. Jeff Rath, go ahead.
You said an X-ray machine?
Yes. Have you been over to Common Police Court, Mr. Rath, in the last 6 years, 7 years?
I think so.
Everyone entering the court.
I know I've walked through a scanner before. I didn't know that was an X-ray.
No, it isn't. It's a magnetometer. The X-ray machine is when you put your briefcase down, your purse,
okay.
and it goes. It's just like the airport.
Sure, that makes sense. That is good. Follow-up question?
Absolutely.
Okay. What are the hours of operation?
We anticipate starting shortly before 8 in the morning and quitting at 4:30. When the normal building operation hours, except we would have them here and in place before City Hall opened. That's our plan. It's fluid. We've just reached this compromise in the last month or so we're still working out some things.
Okay.
Before we continue with any more questions, Safety Director Baum, if you would proceed, if you had any items you wanted to add to this, because I know some of these jobs are predicated on equipment being out front.
So, thank you. So, I think the city and the court reached a good compromise. We're going to have a good working partnership. We're going to have somebody on the 3rd floor, a couple people on the 1st floor, maybe somebody floating back and forth a little bit. We will do our best not to inconvenience city employees, but we will be checking all visitors, all visitor packages. We're going to, obviously, we've got the gate working for the garage downstairs. We have found an X-ray machine and magnetometer to order. However, we're going to wait until there's some personnel so we can sort of coordinate this thing at the same time. Because when we do bring the apparatus in, they're going to send somebody to train the people that are going to be operating it. So we've identified it. We've identified I think Director Rhodes has identified the funds. We've worked out some kinks. This building wasn't designed necessarily for security, so we're going to have to make a few changes. But all in all, I think it's a very positive thing for the city and the courts. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.
Just a follow-up question. Do we know what the costs are going to be to the city for the equipment that we're...
$43,000 for the X-ray and the magnetometer that you'll walk through. You'll walk through and they'll scan your materials, just like domestic relations court in the county.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you.
Any other questions? Let me add. This has been an ongoing issue, not only in the last 4, 5, 6 years, but going way back to past administrations. And we're just extremely pleased that we were able to work out this agreement. It's a good deal for the city. Some people will be inconvenienced, I'm sure, but we're talking about safety of the public. I mean, that's actually the paramount reason for doing this. You folks probably are aware of this, but on any given day, I would venture to say that 90% of the people that enter this building are going to the third floor or going to the fourth floor to file charges or going to the fourth floor to do eviction complaints and small claims complaints. That's a guess. I think I can state it without too much fear of contradiction. Today, we had 30 jurors coming in. And, you know, it's just a good thing that we're doing this. It's not just for the protection of the people that work in the court, but it's primarily for the protection of the people who are forced to be here, either as witnesses, jurors, defendants. And we have had incidences in the past, none that have been life-threatening, but there have been many times when people have brought weapons into the court, into this building, contraband, and we think it's just a really good step for us to take. So that's it. Again, it won't cost you a dime, and it's, I think, a good positive thing for the city.
Okay. Does anyone else from the committee have any questions, comments, concerns? How about anybody from the audience? Okay.
Make a motion.
Second.
Okay. There's a motion on the floor by Jeff Rath, second by Mike Mangus. Seeing no further questions, comments, all those in favor of moving this on to full council signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? Motion passes 5-0. Best of luck with this.
Thank you very much.
Service Committee is next.
Okay, we'll call the Service Committee meeting to order. Those present are myself, Rath, Cost, Bub, Frazier, and Floyd. Up first, consider resolution number 17-68, a resolution of intent to appropriate the real estate known as parcel number 054-27111-00.001, Newark, Licking County, for maintaining and improving the Manning Street Bridge within the city of Newark, Ohio, authorizing the mayor to give notice to the owner of such lands as required by law and declaring an emergency. Mr. Moorhead?
Yes.
You have the floor.
I will talk generally, first of all. All 5 of these resolutions in front of you tonight are for resolutions of intent to appropriate real estate, and they are for 2 bridges. The first one is for Manning Street Bridge. We've been through the design process to replace the Manning Street Bridge and the Ohio Street Bridge. And in both of those situations, both those bridges were built in the 60s. Right-of-way acquisition laws evidently weren't what they are today back when those parcels were purchased, and so there are in the course of securing the right-of-way for the new bridge structures that'll be basically at the same location, it was found that many of these parcels were not either acquired properly or not either acquired with clear title. So we have to basically go back and make sure that the title is clear on all these properties. So on Manning Street Bridge, the parcel that we need to acquire is from Owens Corning, and it's on the northeast corner of the bridge. The appraised value of that small piece of land that we need is $300, and basically this one is a friendly appropriation. We've talked to Owens Corning; they're not opposed to it. However, they are not able to jump through all the legal hoops and do all the paperwork that needs to be done to actually turn the piece of property over to us in the time frame that we need to. And so we need to file an appropriation. Basically, this will allow them to sit back and not do anything. They'll basically not respond to the appropriation. It'll become ours, and we'll give them the $300, and everybody will be clear of the matter. So that's the first one. If we want to vote on that one, I can explain the other ones as we go on then.
Yeah, let's take this one at a time.
Yes, sir.
Second.
So we have a motion by Bob, seconded by Floyd. Any questions from the committee? Mr. Frazier.
Can you just walk us through the process? So we vote on this, it passes through. What are the next steps?
The next step, you'll see at the next meeting an actual ordinance appropriating the land that'll come from the law director's office. So that will be the official appropriation. We need to have this to move along as quick as possible, because you'll have your 30 days after the ordinance is done. We need to have the right-of-way clear to ODOT in November. So this will allow the 30 days to pass. We'll be able to make our certifications to ODOT in November. And then in December, the final plans are due to ODOT. The bids will open in March of next year and will be under construction for both of these bridges, and also a multi-use path along the south side of Ohio Street is also included in the project. That will all be bid and be bid in March of next year, under construction at this time of next year. So,
Any other questions from the committee? Any questions from the audience or those sitting in? Seeing none, all those in favor of passing this on to council signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. That passes 5-0. Thank you. I take it you're not leaving the podium. Want to give us an abbreviated version on the next?
yes.
After I read it. Substance of discussion, resolution number 17-69, a resolution of intent to appropriate the real estate known as parcels number 2A and 2B WD, Newark, Licking County, for maintaining and improving the Ohio Street Bridge within the city of Newark, Ohio, authorizing the mayor to give notice to the owner of such lands as required by law and declaring an emergency.
Yes, so this parcel is on off of Ohio Street. Actually, all four of the next parcels are the next four pieces of legislation are having to do with the Ohio Street Bridge. The owner was the original owner back in we don't even know the actual date, but Alice G. Fleek Miller and Grace F. Carroll. Their address is unknown, and we've tried to contact their heirs and have had no luck in finding those folks or having any contact. The appraised value of this property is also $300, and
Sorry, you have $768 in here. The bid faith offer is $768.
it's for both parcels. Parcel 2, yes, 2A and 2B. Sorry,
Okay.
just 2A was for $300. So.
Okay.
So there you go. That's the story on that one.
So,
Motion.
okay, motion by Floyd,
Second.
seconded by Frazier. So the $768 will go with no known owner, no known whereabouts rather, and no known heirs. I'm assuming, you're assuming that the owner has passed.
When the
What will happen with that money?
when the legislation is passed, the ordinance is passed, the law director's office will file the cases with the courts, and the money will be deposited. And if any of the heirs ever show up, they will be able to withdraw that money.
Fair enough. Any other questions from the committee? Questions from the audience? Seeing none, all those in favor of passing this on to full council for a vote, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. That passes 5-0. Up next, resolution number 17-70, a resolution of intent to appropriate the real estate known as parcels number 6T and 6 WD, Newark, Licking County, for maintaining and improving the Ohio State Bridge within the city of Newark, Ohio, authorizing the mayor to give notice to the owner of such lands as required by law and declaring an emergency.
This parcel, again, there's no known heirs to the owner. The last known owner was Theodosia Wilson. And this parcel is actually down in the river, and there was no actual parcel number assigned to it. So I believe our appraised amount was $300 for that one also. And tried to also contact any heirs and have had no luck in that result.
Motion.
Motion by Floyd.
Second.
Seconded by Bub. Any questions from committee members? Any questions from the audience? Seeing none, all those in favor of passing this on to full council signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. That passes 5-0. Up next, resolution number 17-71, a resolution of intent to appropriate the real estate known as parcel number 7T and 7 WD, Newark, Licking County, for maintaining and improving the Ohio State Bridge within the city of Newark, Ohio, authorizing the mayor to give notice to the owner of such lands as required by law and declaring an emergency.
This one, similar situation. The last known owners were Bessie M. Bourne and Bessie C. White. The last one was deceased in July 6th of 1963. Again, it's a parcel that's now in the bottom of the creek, and again, there was no auditor's parcel number from that one, and I believe the appraised amount is $369 for that one.
Motion.
Motion by Floyd.
Second.
Do you have a second from somebody on the committee?
Second.
Seconded by Frazier. Thank you.
This is service.
Any questions from the committee? Any questions from the audience? Or anybody sitting in? All those in favor of passing this on to full council signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, same sign. That passes 5-0. Up next is 1772, a resolution of intent to appropriate the real estate known as parcel number 054-212-748-00.000, Newark, Licking County, for maintaining and improving the Ohio State Street Bridge within the city of Newark, Ohio, authorizing the mayor to give notice to the owner of such land as required by law and declaring an emergency.
Yes, this parcel is actually located on the southwest corner. Some of the land at the southwest corner of the existing bridge was last owned by.
Dry land.
It does have a little dry land there, yes. Last owned by Josephine Risso, who is deceased as of September 13th, 2000. Had no contact and no response from any of her heirs, and the appraised value of this one is also $300.
Okay. Motion by Floyd.
Second.
Seconded by Frazier. Any questions from the committee?
I have one.
Mr. Frazier.
What is the notification process to the heirs?
If you look through that title document, you've got about 77 pages of background that goes with each of these appropriations. The title document, I forget how many pages that is, but trying to find the heirs of these folks. Our right-of-way acquisition consultant spent a lot of time at the county courthouse researching these properties, doing Google searches for the heirs, pretty much exhausting any possibilities that they could to turn these folks up to have some sort of meaningful negotiation.
Any further questions from the committee? Questions from the audience? Seeing none, all those in favor of passing this on to full council for a vote, signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, same sign. That passes 5-0. Thank you, Ms. Moorhead.
Thank you.
Up next will be the Economic Development Committee.
Okay, we'll call this meeting of the Economic Development Committee to order. Members present are myself, Mr. Rath, Mr. Cost, Mr. Frazier, and Mr. Lang. We do have one piece of legislation on our agenda. I am going to ask that speakers please go to the podium so that you can address the committee, and also we can assure that your comments are on the record. And with that, our legislation tonight is to consider ordinance number 17-40, amending Article 44, LB Limited Intensity Business District, and Article 60, DC Downtown District of the Zoning Code of the City of Newark, Ohio. I believe this is Mr. Mangus's legislation, so if he wants to give sponsor testimony, feel free to do so at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Blake. As you all know, back in June, the council debated whether or not we would enact a moratorium regarding medical marijuana dispensaries, and in the end that was voted down, and we all pretty much agreed that we needed to move forward. And unfortunately, in the last few weeks, push has come to shove. September 8th, the state released its final regulations regarding medical marijuana, set its rules and regulations. We have the opportunity to go beyond, if we see fit, what the state has already dictated for medical marijuana dispensaries. Unfortunately, starting November 3rd of this year, the state is going to begin accepting applications for medical marijuana dispensaries, and there is basically a 11-day window, November 3rd through November 14th, where medical marijuana dispensary potential owners or operators must notify the state where they intend to locate their dispensaries. I've spoken with some administration officials. I've spoken with Mr. Sasson, spoken with Mr. Moorhead and some of the zoning people, and I believe we need to do more as a city council to protect our residents. Unfortunately, this is something we have no idea what is going to happen in the end. We don't know if it's going to bring more people as far as a great deal amount of traffic. We don't even know if Newark will be one of the 3 sites. The district that we're located in, which includes Morrow County, Delaware County, Licking County, and Knox County, is allowed a grand total of 3 medical marijuana dispensaries. And where the state ends up putting those, we have no idea. But we need to have something on the books. There has been some discussion in the past about whether or not we should have fees for the medical marijuana dispensaries, a licensing fee here in Newark, what requirements we will have of them as far as communication with the city. Frankly, in my own opinion, that is something that we can deal with later. But right now, for licensing issues, we need to have zoning on the books. I can defer to Mr. Sasson if he so desires, but in conversations with him, he has led me to believe that zoning is a separate issue from licensing requirements and those sorts of things, and so that's why that is not here. My concern is zoning and where medical marijuana dispensaries are going to be located. I've spoken with many residents in my own ward and other people across Newark, and my general take on this has been from the people I've spoken with that the vast majority of people in Newark want medical marijuana dispensaries, they just don't want them in their own backyard. And so I have proposing under this ordinance that we limit medical marijuana dispensaries basically to general office zoning areas. That we also put into the zoning code a regulation that no medical marijuana dispensaries can be within 500 feet of any zoned residential area. The state requirements already include some other stipulations which the ordinance as written requires the medical marijuana dispensaries to meet. It can't be anywhere, it can't be within 500 feet of a school, it can't be within 500 feet of a church, a public playground, public park, also can't be within 500 feet of basically an addiction center, a center that helps people with addiction issues. This ordinance as written also adds on the downtown area. And to be honest, I'm somewhat divided over whether or not we should limit it from the downtown area. I personally have an issue telling people, well, that we can't put it downtown because we like the downtown. We're trying to improve the downtown. And I've had a few people tell me that that's one of the reasons why it shouldn't be downtown. Personally, from my perspective, the reason why it shouldn't be downtown is because of parking issues. We clearly have some parking issues downtown. We do not know how many people are going to come, even if Newark gets a medical marijuana dispensary. We also have an issue with the state requirement regarding the courthouse grounds. That has officially been deemed an arboretum. And I would have to defer to other people. Is an arboretum deemed to be a public park? And if it is, then 500 feet out greatly limits where a medical marijuana dispensary could be. And so in the end, I was willing to add to the legislation that the downtown area would be exempted because of potential traffic issues and the courthouse grounds in the end. Basically, this is a starting point. I do think we need to move forward very quickly with zoning because, and I can again defer to Mr. Sasson if he desires, but once applications are awarded, it puts us in a little bit of a dicier legal situation in that, well, they've already submitted their application. They've said this is where they want to have their medical marijuana dispensary. It has been awarded based on the zoning established by the state and not by the city. What sort of legal jeopardy does that put us in? We can always fight it. Hopefully we would win. But if we can have this done basically by the end of November, we would have a much firmer legal standing. From committee here, of course, if it's voted out this evening, it would go to full council on Monday, and then once full council, assuming they approve it, it then goes to the zoning or planning commission for a 30-day hearing. And then it would come back to council for final approval, which would put us in late November in all likelihood, with the application deadline ending November 14th. So that's where we basically stand.
Director Sasson, your name was mentioned a few times. Did you want to make any clarification remarks or perhaps
answer any questions if you have, but I don't. Mr. Magnus's representations of our conversation is fairly accurate.
I guess I would add one other thing, and I can have Brian come up. I met with Brian regarding if we put a 500-foot extension beyond that, the medical marijuana dispensary could not be within 500 feet of anything zoned residential in Newark. That would really limit us to about 4 or 5 places in the city. North 21st Street by the Super Walmart and Deo Drive, along those 2 major corridors. Tamarack out on the west end with the industrial areas and the medical areas there. And then on the far east end would seem to be the 3 most likely places for a medical marijuana dispensary by the Longenberger Basket. There's quite a bit of open area there away from residential areas. My major concern with residential areas is, one, we don't know the traffic. We don't know what traffic this is going to bring. There are requirements listed by the state about lighting and those sorts of things, and the last thing I would like is have some great big bright light shining in my bedroom window because the medical marijuana dispensary backs right up to my home, to my property. Another issue as well, as it just went completely out of my head there, medical marijuana is highly debated. My sense was from the earlier meetings that we've had regarding this, committee meetings and council meetings, is that most of us see that there could potentially be some medical benefit to medical marijuana. There's been studies done just recently that were released that it has more of a placebo effect when it comes to pain, that it doesn't have an actual true effect, but I would argue placebo effect is better than no effect. And so it's still highly debated, but I found it very interesting in the state ordinance that it talks about on the packaging for medical marijuana, that medical marijuana dispensaries have to list, let me make sure I get the wording exactly right here, this product may cause impairment, or when eaten or swallowed, the effects and impairment caused by this drug. I'm concerned about if someone happens to walk to the medical marijuana dispensary, gets their medical marijuana, and in whatever form use that medical marijuana, what are the liability issues as well for if they're walking across your property to get back to their own home? And these are all issues that we simply don't know. I don't think the state knows. I don't think that medical professionals necessarily know. And we have a duty to protect the residents of Newark, protect our citizens, protect property values, and those sorts of things.
Mr. Rath, if we could just, I know our health commissioner's here, and he wanted to say a few words on this legislation, so I want to give him some leeway to speak, and then we'll take questions from Mr. Mangus.
Go ahead, Joe, come on up. I just wanted to say something just real quick to kind of introduce Joe tonight from this perspective. So Joe reached out a couple of weeks ago. We set up a meeting. We met with him last week to talk about health and all policies, and I think it's a great topic. We kind of looked back. Health department for the city used to be in this building, so I think a lot of times passing in the hallways, things were discussed and done. Of course, now up on Price Road, they've done a great job in the facility up there, but obviously there's just a slight disconnect because of the distance, and we're not through the hallways. So Joe has offered the concept of health and all policies that their department will look at our legislation upcoming. I mean, it may blossom to much more than that, but at least this point, and see if there's a health-related type comment they'd like to make on it to help us make some decisions. And that pops up, with legislation going out on Thursday right here. So he reached out, and I know Chairman Jeremy Blake reached out, and certainly we invited Joe here tonight to give us some input at the committee level as we formulate, is it an amendment, is it, whatever, just kind of keep an open mind that way, but they're the health professionals, and we'd surely solicit their input on any legislation that might have a health aspect. So with that, Joe, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor.
Yep.
Good evening. Yeah, as the Mayor mentioned, we talked and met with him and his administration and talked about health and all policies. And that's really a movement going on nationally. Even at the state level, there's a bill that is looking at that. And being economic development, you're probably familiar with the Common Sense Initiative at the state, where any piece of legislation gets submitted to the Common Sense Initiative for review, and they say, well, what's going to be the economic business impact, so that the lawmakers can then weigh that with the benefits of the legislation. So this is fairly similar. You look at legislation or policy through a public health lens or through a health and equity lens. And, an example is, if you're a lawmaker and you live in Cleveland and you would like to get to Columbus faster, you think, raising the speed limit on the interstate makes a lot of sense because you're only looking at it as, it'll save me 15 minutes on my drive. But then, the highway patrol or somebody comes in and says, well, here's the statistics. If you raise the speed limit by 10 miles an hour, this many more deaths are going to occur at that speed compared to a lower speed. And then again, it's up to the legislator to decide what they want to do, but at least they have, both sides of that information to weigh the benefits. So health and all policies is really looking at it through that health lens and trying to make sure that something is proposed doesn't have a negative health impact, and also make recommendations if there's things that could be done that might actually provide a beneficial health impact. And it's looking at things that don't typically fall within the public health, purview. So, for us, we're always working on things like, obesity and smoking and immunizations and all those things. But those account for less than half of your actual health status. And the big part of your health status are what we call they're related to your socioeconomic status, your education, your income, where you live, what neighborhood you're in. Do you have a community that's supportive? Do you have a network of support? Do you have all the things that you need in order to achieve your optimal health? And those are things a lot of times that are dealt with, in transportation or education or things that aren't typically, health department topics. So this is a way of kind of at least, getting involved in those things where they have a huge impact on health outcomes, but they're not within when we think about, health care or public health. And it just so happened that this piece of legislation came across, and I looked at it and kind of thought, does it have a health impact or not? Reducing the area that the dispensary could be in has, I would say, no negative health impact, as opposed to, say, banning it in the entire city where, then transportation, people who have a prescription need it, wouldn't have the option to be able to find it. This is just saying not in this particular area, much like the smoking ban. You can smoke, you just can't smoke inside the building. You have to go outside. So it would be a similar type of thing. But then I also thought, if you're looking at the list of what's in there now, there's pawn shops, tattoo parlors, heavy equipment repair shops, and things that are banned in that center downtown district. And then this one being kind of a health-related ban on the medical marijuana dispensaries. And I thought, well, it may be an opportunity to use that health and all policies and bring up the idea of looking at significant tobacco retailers or vaping shops or, tobacco, pipes and paraphernalia resellers that, of course, aren't really used for tobacco, but would go along with the medical marijuana somewhat. So just looking at, those types of facilities, if you're looking at what makes sense in that, downtown center zoning district, perhaps those would be other health-related things that you'd be able to look at to say, well, we don't really want a bunch of vape shops downtown. We don't want our kids that are coming downtown to enjoy the revitalization to either see, big tobacco retailers or medical marijuana or things that have, are going to normalize what we hope is not a behavior that we're trying to advance for our communities. So that's kind of it in a nutshell, but I'd be happy to take any questions.
I have a question.
Mr. Fraser.
How do you feel about legalized medical marijuana for medical treatments as a health professional?
I mean, I'm sure that it has positive health applications, and the concern is, and what we've seen in other states is, and we saw here with the pill mills, that there are people who will give you a prescription and dispense pain medications, and you'll have the same problem with medical marijuana.
So
the state's really going to have to police that.
To stop you there, there's a distinct difference between addiction to opiates and marijuana abuse, correct?
Right.
And so when we talk about the pill mills and the opiate epidemic, it's vastly different than medical marijuana for 20 illnesses in the state of Ohio, correct?
Right. Yeah. Really,
so
I'm
that's
just talking
a tough
about
comparison to have where you're kind of lumping it in with the opiate epidemic for medical marijuana that's regulated by the state.
Right. I'm really just saying to get a prescription, you shouldn't get a prescription for a pain medication if you don't have pain, but the state didn't really keep an eye on that and it got out of hand, so that would be the same thing here.
Mr. Ebel, let's just get back to the intent of this legislation. Is you're suggesting that in Article 60 of this legislation that you believe that we should add, I heard you say tobacco stores, vaping stores, or places that sell pipes. So that area would be listed. I mean, right now the legislation has an A, B, C, D, E. So this would be kind of like additional items listed under places that shouldn't be in the downtown area. I mean, that's really your purpose of being here tonight. So I mean, we could debate those things, which Mr. Fraser is bringing up later, but what you're discussing is these are the things that we should add here.
At least to consider if we're trying to, obviously we want a healthy community. We have the farmers market. We're doing a lot of things, to try to get people out and move to downtown, but also change the culture in our community to be more healthful. And so this would be just something to possibly consider if you're making amendments to that zoning, to at least think about it. And obviously, it's not binding or anything like that. It's just saying, here's something to think about with the assumption that maybe it wouldn't have occurred if you were just focused on the medical marijuana aspect at all, and hadn't really thought about the the other things that potentially could benefit the downtown.
Does anyone from the committee have questions for Mr. Evil regarding those suggestions? Mr. Rapp?
Well, my only comment was you started talking about pipes and bongs and things of that nature and associating it with medical marijuana, and I thought you were saying that one had a correlation with the other, but apparently it doesn't now.
Yeah, I mean, it would just be, if you're banning medical marijuana, the dispensary, then the assumption is you probably don't want, a paraphernalia shop going in that same area that you're
banning. Of course, we know that paraphernalia has absolutely nothing to do with medical marijuana because there's paraphernalia is associated with combustible recreational marijuana, and medical marijuana has nothing to do with that. There is no combustible marijuana. There is no smoking with marijuana for medical purposes.
Yeah, I think in other states, at least, there is.
Well, there may be, but we're talking about Ohio and Newark. And in Ohio, there is no combustible form of medical marijuana. It's all oil-based and consumable product. So it has nothing to do with combustibles. So being able to smoke it in a pipe or a bong or a one-hit or anything like that is just not.
Right. Yeah, I'm not familiar with. Yeah, not familiar with that.
So I understand trying to keep the downtown healthy,
right,
and getting away from paraphernalia shops and getting away from Jim Bob's discount tobacco stores and
right,
things like of that nature. It's just that the two of them aren't related in that form.
Any other questions from the committee for Mr. Evil? Anything from the audience for Mr. Evil? All right, well, I want to, go ahead, Mr.
Yeah, I think this is probably for Brian, but if there are 3 locations that are possible, does the city of Newark have a say in which one of those? I mean, somebody brought up Long River area.
Mr. I heard, are you referring that to Mr. Moorhead?
Well, either one. I mean, because if there are companies going in to the Longaberger building and this already exists there, then what?
Do you understand her question?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
So it's not.
Thank you, Joe.
I don't think we didn't identify a specific parcel where it can happen. We looked at the map and we're kind of like eyeballing where the areas are where you could get 500-foot radius without being in the proper zoning, but without having residential within 500 feet of you. And these are the general areas. So there's probably several parcels in each of those areas. We didn't say this 1, 2, 3, 4 East Main Street is the place. So there are general areas. Those are just the general areas where it could happen.
I got a question for Brian.
Mr. Frazier.
What is the purpose of a limited intensity business district and the definition in the zoning? Isn't it to act as a buffer between residential areas and business areas?
Sure.
You
can argue.
Do you trust me?
I don't know.
Do you trust me? I read it today. Trust me. It says that. So here's what my struggle is. We have a 500 feet restriction in a zoning classification that's built for the specific reason to protect residency. So isn't that indicative that it should probably be a medium intensity business district instead of a limited intensity business district? I'm going to say yes.
Can you let him answer?
Yeah, he can.
I don't have an opinion on that, honestly. You look at it was strictly a matter of looking at the map to try to find where those districts are, and you could put it in any of several districts, actually.
Agreed. So I have some more comments when ready.
Let me just. I want Mr. Sassman to correct me if I'm wrong. The committee's actions here would be to, 1, if we wanted to amend something here tonight, we could. 2, we could send it to full council. They would send it to the planning commission, and then the planning commission would have their proceedings. and if they recommended any changes, then that would come back to full council as well. Is that correct in me saying that?
That's all correct.
That's all correct. Okay. So we could vote to send this on to council, and then they will send it to planning commission. Or if you have changes, then we can do that tonight too. I just want to make sure that that's said clearly for everyone understands. Mr. Lang, did you have a hand up?
I did have a quick question for Mr. Mangus, if I could.
Yeah.
You mentioned general office zoning in your testimony earlier.
I'm sorry, I meant general business if I said general office.
I just want to make sure there wasn't an error that you...
It was a spoken error, not intentional error.
I just want to clear, that's all.
Sure. And regarding the limited business districts allow grocery stores. And what, in essence, we're talking about is a retail establishment. My difficulty with this particular retail establishment, whether you want to call it a medical retail establishment or just a retail establishment, because no prescriptions are being given by doctors, the doctor's just saying someone could benefit from it, we don't know what's going to happen. And it's easier to be stricter early on than later. The last thing I want to do is have somebody's life completely disrupted by having a medical marijuana dispensary right in their own backyard, because that their residential property, what's designated as a residential piece of property, backs right up to a limited business area. The reason why I think Mr. Sasson, and I can defer to him again, included limited business is, I said, any place where retail is allowed. Are we going to single out this particular business and say you can't be in a limited retail area at all? Or are we going to say you can be there, but we protect our residents at the same time, just because we don't know? That was my main rationale for the 500 feet. And it also goes along with schools and all of those other things already listed. I am more than open to amendments. I just think we need a starting ground, a starting place. And I think zoning is the most important thing that we need to be doing right now. These other issues about fees, licensing, and all of that can be done at a later date. But with the application procedure basically starting 5 weeks from now, concluding in 6 weeks from now, we need to be moving forward on something now. We can't postpone this till next year. We can't postpone this till December. This is something we need to move forward with now. And so this is why I've proposed what I've proposed, for all those other reasons as well. As far as, tobacco shops, all of that, I would be very open to considering, limitations on those. I'm not sure it should be in this legislation either. I think there's some differences between the two, medical marijuana and tobacco stores. And so I would prefer that to be in another piece of legislation, personally. But I'm even open to consideration if the council wants to consider that as well.
Any questions for Mr. Rath?
Yeah, I was curious, your impairment analogy.
My
impairment analogy. You talked about a warning label that was on the medical marijuana.
Yes.
And the city's liability
not even the city's liability, the citizen's liability. If someone trips in my yard on my sidewalk, do I have to pay when they break their leg because of a potential impairment caused by the medical marijuana?
So aren't there also warning labels, disclaimers, statements on most medication that you get from a pharmacy?
Yes, there is.
That prohibits you from or recommends that you don't operate heavy machinery or even drive or things like that. How is that different than any other medication?
Sure, and I take a few of those medications. To be entirely honest with you, Mr. Rath, I think the major difference is, even though the state of Ohio has made this a legal drug, at least for medical purposes, it's still a Tier 1 drug that is not deemed legal by the federal government, which isn't deemed legal for recreational use. And we're basically the state, and the state has forced us, the city of Newark, to be in this sort of limbo land, untried. We don't know what is going to happen in the end. And so that would be my argument. That's the difference. There's been quite a few studies done that medical marijuana is beneficial to people, and I'm not denying that it is.
I don't know that we're in a position to qualify to, or even if it's right for us to even begin to debate the effectiveness of medical marijuana. I don't think anybody in this room is qualified to answer that question.
I agree.
I think we've got to go by, I think there's been research and studies done, and the state has come out and said, yes, there is a benefit. We think our citizens of Ohio could benefit from this, so therefore we're making it legal.
And that could very well be. At the same time, we're in this uncharted territory. And what I think we have to do first and foremost is make sure that our residents are protected. And how do we protect them? Well, one way we protect them is by limiting perhaps where medical marijuana dispensaries are. It's possible that a medical marijuana dispensary moves in right next door to you and your property values go through the roof. But I also think it's a possibility that property values will decline. We have safety and liability issues. We have inconvenience issues with the various restrictions put in place regarding with lighting that's required around medical marijuana dispensaries that the state has to enforce. And so I think this 500-foot distance sort of meets a nice middle ground where our residents are protected, their property values are protected, safety issues are much less likely, at least in someone's own backyard, and that we're doing our job as a city council in the end.
Mr. Lang.
Yeah, so you mentioned a couple times the notice requirements are something we could address later. I also noticed, we're only dealing with dispensaries and not cultivators or processors. I guess I just want to understand why we can't accomplish all of that with one piece of legislation now.
I would defer that to Mr. Sasson if you're willing to speak on it. Generally, zoning is kept separate from the other issues, but
I wouldn't think that there would be any issue with one piece of legislation that addressed dispensaries, cultivators, and processors all in one piece of legislation, because it all addresses the zoning aspect of those three phases of the process. I'm not comfortable with the same piece of legislation including practical provisions such as what additional information the city might want in an application process or fees. I'm not comfortable with that being part of the same zoning legislation. They take two different paths from a parliamentary procedure. They're kind of separate issues. I think those issues can all be addressed and are best addressed in a separate piece of legislation. But your comment regarding cultivators and processors certainly could be in the same piece.
Gotcha. Thank you.
and I personally don't object to that. A cultivator, in all likelihood, is not going to be in as much of a business district or retail location. They're going to tend to be in more isolated locations, not on the main drag of 21st Street sort of thing. And actually, to respond to Dee's question earlier to Mr. Moorhead, there are actually other areas of Newark which would allow for a medical marijuana dispensary. Personally, if I was a business person, they wouldn't necessarily be locations where I would put them. There's quite a bit of area around Owens Corning. It's off of a main drag. You don't have a lot of retail business there. You're going to want your dispensary somewhere where it's more likely to be accessible. So I don't want you to think when I said that there's just these three areas previously. I've asked Mr. Moorhead to draw up a map exactly where these locations would be, where these businesses, a medical marijuana dispensary could be created, established, and we're in the process of doing that now.
Any other questions from the committee? Any questions from the audience? Does anyone want to offer a motion at this time? Motion. Motion by Mr. Cost, second by Mr.
I have a comment that I haven't been allowed to make yet, so whenever that gets done.
There's a motion and a second to send this on to full council. Mr. Frazier, you have a comment?
So there's some fundamental issues I have with this legislation. Yes, we should zone, but we should zone appropriately. We should zone comprehensively. So I don't know if we're aware that on Monday I made the announcement that I'd be drafting up legislation, sending it to the law director's office to find a comprehensive, all-inclusive approach to this. And so what I recommended was a medium intensity business. So if we zone appropriately, we don't need a residency requirement for past 500 feet. It's zoned appropriately. We don't spot zone. It's within the core business districts. It provides a buffer automatically because it's not limited business district. And we're able to effectively communicate that this is where we're going to do business. That includes medium intensity, general business, high intensity, general commercial, on forth. And so the other struggle that I have is what we are trying to protect. So the state gives us a pretty detailed outline of what to protect. And we're talking about schools, we're talking about playgrounds, we're talking about parks, we're talking about churches. My recommendation is to extend that another 500 feet and make it 1,000 feet. And so that way we have additional protections within the city in case the state of Ohio decides to change that or update that. We have it in our zoning in order to make sure that we understand and that people will be here for the long-term success of their business. And then it's been a very painful conversation listening to this. And so when it comes to what we need to do as a community is we need to set a mechanism in place that permits people to do business here, but also requires them to communicate to us so that we understand what's in their application, we understand where they're going to put their business, and we can update our safety forces to make sure that they're aware that this is coming and to plan accordingly. I get that we need 2 pieces of legislation. I know that you've probably been busy and law director and maybe you haven't seen the email yet, but if we have to break it out into 2 different pieces of legislation, that's fine. Doing something that's wrong just because we need to do it fast is not the way that we should govern. We should look at it, find a comprehensive approach for the long term, and do it right. Limited intensity business is not the right zoning. The residency restriction is adding additional restrictions that are unnecessary or superfluous. And then also, we are not effectively setting up a long-term solution for people that have already applied to be cultivators. And also, the framework to have processors has not been defined as well. So the legislation I plan on bringing forward is a zoning change in order to update cultivators and processors to a limited industrial district, and then to have dispensaries fall under the category of medium intensity business in order to protect the interests of residential neighborhoods by effective zoning, not by restriction. Other than that, feel free, I'll shoot out the email once I get it of that legislation. When it comes to the tobacco issue, I understand it's really not appropriate for a medical marijuana and tobacco conversation. It's more of a downtown zoning conversation, I think is what you're looking for. Love to have that with you. My big concern is with establishments like UVF that fall within the district that sell tobacco goods, and so how do we not negatively impact those businesses that are already here? With that, I'll yield.
Any other questions or comments?
Jim, what's the difference in medium and what Mike has proposed?
I think Mr. Moorhead started to talk about that earlier.
You want me to answer that? So medium intensity usually revolves around the size as well as the frequency of those people that attend. And so the biggest difference between limited intensity and medium intensity is medium is zoned for health clinics and health facilities, which I feel based on the use that we're going to see is a lot more active than the limited intensity, which typically revolves around very few people coming in and out of there. And so by zoning it to medium intensity, it further restricts those residential areas as well as sets the foundation in order to have larger traffic patterns to support the business.
Mrs. Floyd.
I just happen to have my zoning code with me.
Keeping your back pocket.
This was a zoning issue, so I brought my zoning code. Medium intensity is much, much broader and includes all the uses in general office and limited business, general service offices like advertising agencies, employment services, photographic things, municipal, governmental, public utility offices and facilities, health and medical clinics, banks, savings and loans, credit unions, restaurants and other eating establishments, furniture and home furnishing sales, laundromats, automobile minor repairs, gas stations, quick lubes, tire stores, car washes, automobile sales and leasing, veterinary office, funeral homes, drive-in, drive-through sales and service, pawn shops, recycle collection points, and on and on.
And Carol, can you read what the purpose of a limited intensity district is?
Purpose of the medium intensity.
Limited intensity district.
Medium intensity business district is to provide for the orderly development of retail and office land uses of limited size.
And what's limited intensity business district purpose?
You could have asked me before I turned the page.
I did.
The purpose of the limited intensity business district is to provide for the orderly development of retail and office land uses of limited size. This district may serve as a buffer between residential uses and more intensive commercial uses.
Thank you, Mrs. Floyd. My understanding is that this would go to the Planning Commission, which are a group of people that would deal with these. If they want to make recommendations for changes, that would go from there. So. Any other, Mr. Latt?
So to clarify, it would go to the Planning Commission before it would go to council from here?
It'll go to full council, and council would send it to the Planning Commission. And then Mr. Rhodes could deal with it.
My favorite.
Mr. Cost.
As it stands right now, has administration weighed in on this whatsoever as far as how they feel about what has been proposed? Because I haven't heard.
Thank you for the question, Councilman Cost. We have had considerable conversation on this with Councilman Mangus, and we're very supportive of the way it is written. Again, when it goes to council, council has an opportunity to amend if they want. It'll come to Planning Commission. Another 5 people will get their eyes on it. Planning Commission would be the second public hearing on it, so we'll see what the public has to say to it. And then ultimately it comes back to full council with an opinion from Planning Commission. But this was a document that was put together with a lot of communication, a lot of work, a lot of debate, and a lot of give and take.
Thank you, Director. Mr. Lane, did you have a comment?
I have trouble supporting this legislation, being that we are missing the cultivators and the processors piece. And I generally do think this particular legislation needs to be a more collaborative process. I was a bit disappointed to see Mark had commented and said, "Hey, we're working on legislation," and then didn't really seem like there was communication back and forth, and then we had legislation in front of us that didn't seem to reflect any of the notes that I had seen from Mark already. So that gives me trouble with how we're proceeding this. I do hope Mark or Mr. Frazier can do this in a more collaborative way, send out notices to all of council and let everybody comment so that we can get something in front of us that meets with everybody's requirements, and I think needs to address all the discussions we've had. I think the notice and license requirements is almost as important a piece as the zoning itself, because we need to be notified. I think it's very important that we're notified as soon as folks are making those applications, and as we discussed at previous meetings, that's missing from the state legislation that's gone forward. So with that, I'll yield.
Any other comments? Mr. Ellington.
Thank you, Chairman. Just correct me if I'm wrong, but if we're talking about this November deadline, time it goes from us to the Planning Commission, and you guys will take at least 30, maybe 60 days. So we won't probably see this until at least January, unless I'm off base here, or somewhere in that vicinity. How is the administration going to handle this November deadline? Or is there any thoughts on that, about if somebody applies, or are we going to say where it's going to be? Thank you.
I think part of that discussion was generated by comments that I had made with regard to issues surrounding a property owner or a dispensary permit holder making a grandfather clause. Okay, because let's say November 4th, between November 4th and whatever the dates are, they're running around in my head, November 4th and November 14th or 15th or whatever. They make their application for a dispensary in the city of Newark. Okay. At that time, there will be no zoning restrictions in place specifically addressing medical marijuana dispensaries. At some point in time, I think it's fairly clear there will be. We don't know when that will be, but there will be some form of zoning additional restrictions imposed. We don't know when these licenses are going to be issued by the state. Is that going to take 48 hours? I don't think the state of Ohio does anything in 48 hours. Is it going to take 48 weeks? Probably not. How long is it going to take? I don't know. So there's the second window that we have to look at. What if a person extends, themselves financially from a business standpoint to open a business with this having filled out their application but not yet received a permit? Are they in a different legal standing vis-a-vis this grandfather argument without any zoning legislation in place? I think they could make that argument. I'd rather have the city's side of that argument. I don't know how Mr. Lang feels about that one, but I think they could make the argument that, hey, I've extended myself here with the expectation that I can do this in the city of Newark, and there's no zoning code provisions. Now you're going to come in and impose them on me. The third phase of that process is that they've now received a permit from the state of Ohio. If we don't have zoning provisions in place, now they make maybe an even stronger argument that I've not only extended myself from a business standpoint, I've received a license from the state to do business in this location with the understanding there's no zoning regulations, and now you're trying to impose them on me. Their grandfather argument's a little stronger than it would be otherwise. It's still not as strong as the traditional grandfather argument that I've got a business running here, you can't change the rules on me, which is what we all know the traditional rule to be. But when they get themselves in that third spot, if we still don't have a zoning regulation, but they're now holding a permit from the state of Ohio, does that strengthen their argument? New ground, okay? I don't know what the answer is. I'd rather not have the argument. I'd rather get these done as soon as possible, even though we know we're not going to get it done by November 4th. That's fine. We should still get it done as soon as possible.
Thank you, Director Sassett. Any final comments, questions for Committee Director Rhodes?
Yeah, I'd just make a comment. As you guys are all aware, when it comes to the council level, you can make amendments right here to the legislation. You can make amendments at the council level, too, in committee. Those are good times to make amendments. You can come to the Planning Commission and offer amendments, and we can send it back amended, and then it comes back to council again. So this is the beginning of a path, is what I would say.
This being more of a vehicle to continue the discussion.
Absolutely. And I think everybody's open to look.
Thank you, Director Rhodes. Any final comments, committee or otherwise? Okay, we have a motion by Mr. Cost, second by Mr. Blake. All those in favor, send this on to full council, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, same sign.
Aye.
Aye. The motion fails, 2-3. There being no further legislation on the agenda, economic development is finished, and next up is capital improvements.
It is 6:51. I'll call this meeting of the Capital Improvements Committee to order. Those present are myself, Mr. Lang, Mr. Frazier, Mr. Rath, Mr. Blake, and Mrs. Hall.
I'm not on your committee.
Did I have that wrong?
Here.
Oh, yeah, man. Sorry, Mr. Mangus, not Mr. Hall. And on the agenda, we've got one, Mrs. Hall, sorry. There we go. Apologies. On the agenda, we've got one item, Resolution 17-65, appropriating monies from the current expense of the municipal corporation in the amount of $2,996.45. Director Rhodes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What this is a reappropriation of an open PO from 2016 where I did not spend the money, and I just want to make it available for 2017.
That'll entertain a motion.
Motion. Second.
Motion by Mr. Frazier, second by Mr. Rath. Any further discussion?
I have a question. So is there any plans for this money for?
No, not at this point. We're just trying to close out. This is the second week in a row. We're just trying to close out 16 POs, and towards the end of the year, we'll probably come and unappropriate a couple things.
Okay. With that, we'll vote to send this on to full council. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign.
Thank you.
Passes 5-0. And that concludes the agenda for this evening. Next full council meeting is October 2nd.